Well, good afternoon. Welcome to the Office of Student Success. My name is Tae Sung. I am the Dean of the Office of Student Success and an Associate Professor of English here at California Baptist University. This podcast conversation is going to be centered around the theme of hope, which is our academic theme from the Office of the Provost this year. And we are here looking forward to a wonderful conversation about the role of hope in higher education. Whether as my own journey as a student and also as a faculty member, I'm not sure if I've thought much about the role of hope in the classroom. I don't think I was trained to think about hope in the classroom. I don't think I was trained to think about how to instill hope in my students after a course, right? If anything, the rigors of a traditional liberal arts education often, we emphasize the virtues and values that sometimes you learn from despair, right?
Mm-hmm.
From the challenges of really going through the academic learning process. But we all know that we are in a time and place where our students are needing hope more than ever before. And especially in faith-based institution like ours, in a Christian university like ours, I think this is a wonderful opportunity for us to think about the role of hope in the university. And so I'm joined by some esteemed guests and friends of the Office of Student Success to think a little bit about the role of hope. And we're really hoping that our CBU students, staff, and faculty will benefit from this conversation and the years of experience and the virtues that are represented here, that we may learn and take something away of the role of hope in the university today. And so I'll ask each of you to introduce yourselves briefly.
I'm Eric Motley. I'm visiting campus. I'm the Deputy Director of the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C.
Thank you very much. Yes.
I'm Jeff McNair. I am a special ed professor in severe disabilities, and I write a lot about disability ministry and theology.
Fantastic.
I'm Ricardo Cordero Soto. I'm the current chair of mathematical sciences here at CBU, professor of mathematics.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. I thought that we would begin by an excerpt from Eric's wonderful book called Madison Park, A Place of Hope, which is not only a personal memoir, right, of his own journey towards success, but really his story is rooted in a community of people where he was raised called Madison Park in outside of Montgomery, Alabama.
Yes.
That's right. And it really is in remembering, right, the stories and tales of the people that have contributed to his success. He weaves his own personal story with the story of that community. And it's a very powerful and moving story. And we want to encourage everyone listening to get a copy and certainly read it, not only to learn about Eric's story, but really, my hope is that we would be able to reflect on how we might tell our own stories better through Eric's example. But I've chosen a little passage here from the book when Eric talks about his university experience, right? His time in college and what he took away. And this is a passage where he writes, "When I entered Samford University's gates, I had sought only an undergraduate degree. I didn't think my love for ideas, history, music, and art would grow as they did. I had studied political theory and philosophy, and as I began to think about what would come after college, I knew that I somehow wanted to play a part in helping the wider world move toward achieving justice." And justice here, I'm assuming, is a larger Platonic idea,
very
right?
much so, yes.
Right? Making the world a better place.
Yes.
We're not just talking about one political agenda or anything
That is
like
correct,
that, right?
yeah.
And so justice in that larger sense. And when I read that, I thought as a faculty member, my goodness, if this is what I got from a student teaching eval, right? Course eval at the end of a semester where a student said, this is what I'm taking away from my experience in this class or from CBU. I want to find some way. I've discovered through my time as a student here, I want to find some way to make the world a better place. I thought, what an achievement that would be, right?
Yeah.
And so part of I wanted to hear and ask you, Eric, and I'll ask the others as well, is how did your college experience help you to arrive at this realization that you wanted to contribute, right, to making the world a better place in this way?
One of the most remarkable points of introduction to Samford University was the opening convocation. And the president was Dr. Thomas Quartz, who later came to play a very incredible role in my own kind of spiritual and intellectual development. And standing at the podium, looking across to see if all these students who had convened at the beginning of the academic year, the freshmen, he spoke about the possibility, really hope, that each of you have come here, have been called here for a purpose. And you are here to realize that purpose. And whether or not it's clear to you now, things will unfold. And you've been called because you have a reason to be here. There's a larger good that you will come to encounter. You will encounter ideas that are foreign to you, embrace them, examine them. You will meet people, perhaps someone sitting next to you in this very auditorium, that will come to change your life. And you will learn from them. And collectively, you will be on a journey together. But this is your moment to discover why you have been created and why you've been called to this place at this moment. And with such an invitation, I mean, I was arrested by the thought that there is this larger purpose for good. And I never will forget leaving that auditorium and going by the Dean of Students' office for an appointment and looking on his wall, and he had a poem called Desiderata by Max Ehrmann. Desiderata, Latin for things to be desired. And there was a wonderful line that stuck, and it clicked. You're no less than the trees and the stars. You have a right to be here. And whether or not the world is unfolding, whether or not you realize it, the world is unfolding just as it should. And
That's beautiful.
yeah. And with that, I thought, I'm going to embrace every person, every idea, every experience. I might never be afforded such a thing again.
That's a wonderful reminder, right? Because I would say this was probably true back then as well, but maybe more so now, that we often think about the college education as a means to an end, a degree, right? I just got to get through these next few years, get this degree, get past my courses, right? Finish my major, walk across that stage so that I can move on with my life. But to think about your college experience as an opportunity to build relationships and encounter ideas and experiences that might open up the possibilities of purpose. That's really beautiful.
And if I could just add a note to that, it was not without his reminding us of all the societal problems, all the intractable problems in society. That was also a part of his orientation remarks. But he was beckoning us to realize that we had a part to play in addressing many of these issues that confront society, in making a more peaceable kingdom.
Yes.
And a better society for everyone.
Yes, that's fantastic. Jeff, might turn the question to you, right? When did you discover that you wanted to contribute to making the world a better place?
Well, I went to a small Christian college, Wheaton College, outside of Chicago, and showed up there mostly to play basketball. I'm a tall guy back in the day.
I can see it. Yes.
But no, I was invited to participate in a kind of like a Friday night recreation group for individuals with disabilities. And that was the first time I met someone with autism or cerebral palsy or seizure disorders or whatever it might be. And I just fell in love with these people because I loved their honesty. You know, there was no guile. There was, if I didn't like you, they said, I don't like you, you know, or if I love you, I love you. And that was so endearing. And so then as I looked around, falling in love with these people and thought, nobody's doing anything for these people. This is back in the early 70s, before there was even special ed law where they could go to school. And then in particular, I looked at the Christian college that I was at, and the Christian college was doing nothing in this regard. They were not teaching about it. They were not offering classes like that talked about the theology or God's sovereignty and purpose and disability. And even as a big dumb basketball player, I recognized I could do something about this. Maybe this is my thing. To kind of encourage the Christian community and to love on all the people that God has created under his sovereignty. And it was like almost at that time as if God grabbed me by the collar and said, this is what you're going to do. So it was interesting. It was not directly through coursework that I came to my passion, but it was through what I didn't see in my coursework that I recognized that something needed to be done. And then God in his grace allowed me to progress beyond that with, advanced degrees in special ed and that kind of a thing. So that's kind of where I got gripped and grabbed was kind of inadvertently through my college experience.
You know, I think that's beautiful, because I think sometimes we think about, even if sometimes we have those kinds of experiences, we often want to brush them aside. You know, that's a distraction from what I need to get done, right? For my coursework and things like that. So just a question back to you, Jeff. Like, what do you think? You know, was it really a sense of God's purpose? You know, you said that you felt like the Lord somehow grabbing your collar a little bit to get your attention, that this could be something, right? Could you speak to that just a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, all my life, you know, I've been in churches and pastors would say we need to love our neighbor.
Yes.
And I remember just once I understood the disability thing, I looked around and think, well, then why aren't we all here? If we're supposed to love our neighbors, why aren't we here? And the more that I was involved in the Christian community, I recognized that this is an incredible blind spot. It's a blind spot in the Christian church. It's a blind spot in Christian colleges. It's a blind spot in seminaries. And I mean, that was like putting meat in front of a hungry dog for me, where I was like, I'm going to run after this thing. And, you know, even as a special ed guy, right, I start writing about disability ministry and trying to understand, why aren't theologians writing about this? This is such a critical issue. 20% of the population, for goodness sakes, and we're not addressing it. To God's glory, we've made some progress, but we still have a long way to go in this regard, particularly within the Christian community, to move forward.
Yes. Ricardo, how about yourself?
It's a good question. You know, when I first started my undergraduate career, I think that at the moment, I was concentrated on my love of mathematics. Mathematics ended up being the pursuit that led me eventually to graduate school, to wanting to become a professor. So at the moment, I wasn't very aware of maybe a deeper sense other than what I was trying to get done, which was what you were saying earlier. Sometimes we think of the college experience, the university final goal is just to get me to the next thing. What do I need to get to the job, to get to the paycheck? And what I started to notice was that at the time I was a Christian and I was active in my church, but I was at a secular university. And I noticed that in conversations, my fellow STEM majors, meaning that they were also in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and so forth, they would be curious about, what is this mathematician doing, believing in God so fervently, with no qualifiers to that of modification? Why hasn't he changed the way he believes? And so it started some interesting conversations that at first I did not seek to have, but that became apologetic in nature and thus evangelistic. And Tay, I've shared with you before, I have an evangelistic heart. And so I realized at the time that the university provided the stage for great exchange of ideas, and also, more importantly, the opportunity to present Christ in a context that you wouldn't think is normal in a secular university. And so that curiosity that my fellow peers had, they would bring to these conversations, and some of them ended up, in a sense, investigating and looking more into, what does it mean to be a disciple of Jesus? Maybe I have a portrait, a caricature of what it means to be a disciple of Jesus. And so the first thing that I think took me beyond the typical expectation of the college experience was realizing that this is my ministry. This environment is an opportunity for me to have meaningful conversations about the overall holistic well-being of a student, not just their academic well-being, but going deeper, formational experiences, which is some of what you've discussed. And then the second aspect was, at some point, moving beyond my undergraduate degree, going into the graduate degree, and eventually into professorship. I'm an applied mathematician. I started to think about, how does an applied mathematician do Christian applied mathematics? How do I seek to solve problems that have real-world applications, but maybe with a Christ-like compassion? I'll give you an example. A lot of students might get into applied mathematics, rightly so, because of a passion for maybe developing models for understanding how certain physical phenomena occur. And that's awesome, and that's great. Maybe you want to literally become a rocket scientist. But in this ever-changing world, especially now at the rate at which the world changes, there are new problems that are emerging consistently. And math kind of hasn't paid that much attention to it. There are definitely innovators in the applied mathematics field that are starting to look into these aspects. But what can applied mathematics speak into some of the newest problems that maybe have been neglected by the mathematical sciences? And so the way that I've discussed this with my current students in our Masters in Applied Mathematics is we want to have Samaritan-like compassion for some of the newest problems that the world is experiencing. There are people in need through all sorts of different social contexts that haven't had the benefit of some mathematical innovation that can bring a new solution. So as an applied mathematician, sure, do what you're passionate about, but also realize you can speak light and solutions into a problem that might have not had the mathematical insight that you could provide. So first and foremost, if I put all that, or let me put it all together, the package of when I was an undergrad and through these days when I'm a professor, I think my goal as an educator and in using the college experience to maybe bring justice and hope to the students and the environment beyond is to think of my role and that of the students as using mathematics to, one, glorify God in their conversations and their formational experiences with students, peers, etc. And number two, to provide Christ-like compassion-based solutions to a world that has new problems. I know that's kind of a lot, but I've just been sitting here thinking about this question.
Yeah. Ricardo, what I like about that is, when I often think about my experience with math, it's the problem on the page.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Solving the problem on the page. But what you're talking about is something much more, that is a means to thinking about embodied problems in the real world. Mm-hmm. And I think this is a significant shift that's happening in higher education, especially with Christian higher education, where we're no longer seeing our students as heads walking on sticks. Right? Just brains walking around on sticks, right? Oftentimes we think about education as an abstract thing. Here are the problems or the knowledge that we want you to master. But what I'm hearing as a common thread across all three of your stories is that we have to think about our college experience as an embodied experience.
Yes.
It's in relationship. It's in context. It's in the interruptions, and who knows what kind of person or problem we'll encounter in the real world. And what drives our desire for knowledge may be fueled by that, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. My own experience is kind of similar to Ricardo's. I went to a secular university as well, and I often say that I had two born-again experiences in my second year of college. The first was a spiritual born-again experience where I had a very profound encounter with that began my faith journey. The second one was an intellectual born-again experience as a result of, soon after, taking a course on prison autobiographies. So I read the literature of people who were in prison and have written their memoirs and stories and things like that. And here I was, right, reading the Bible for the first time, not as an abstract theological exercise, but thinking about people who were poor, people who made perhaps, big mistakes, right? And having to reflect and think about it. People who are marginalized, people who are on the margins of society, whose voices that we wouldn't normally hear. And that shaped the way that I read the Bible, right? All of a sudden, the prophets became a lot more important and realized they weren't just simply repeating themselves, right, in poetry over and over again. There was a profound common thread of God's justice, right, in the world, and that my faith had to be much more than just an intellectual exercise. It had to be embodied out in the world in some way. And for me, eventually, it culminated in really thinking about the least of these, right? Matthew chapter 25. How might my education impact those people?
Yes.
And my next question has to do with how college and our college education can potentially form us to become agents of hope, right? Because when you think about right? Sometimes going out into the world and tackling some of those problems. Some of those are problems that you were introduced to at the convocation, right? There are so many students today that hear about those problems in the world, are overwhelmed, paralyzed by it, right? How might we think about what we do here at places like CBU as forming our students as agents of hope? Do you have any thoughts about this, Eric?
I do, and I've been thinking about the conversation we just had. You know, one of the great responsibilities that we have, especially in Christian higher education, is that we're not just dealing with the mind. We're actually dealing in Platonic terms with the soul, the very essence, the totality of the individual, the very essence, the ousia of one's own existence. And the idea of nurturing individuals and cultivating individuals to be awakened and to be aware, I think, is an important responsibility that the university has. Too often we graduate as an English major or a mathematician or a philosopher, and we have no awareness of the larger world beyond that discipline. And so I think it's a part of the university's responsibility to awaken us to the awareness of all the issues in the world and how what we're pursuing has some application in helping to address some of the societal challenges. One. Secondly, I also think when I was leaving my small town in Montgomery, Alabama, my grandmother reminded me, as I was reminded constantly by the tutors who helped me, that to whom much is given, much is not expected, but much is required. And when I came to Samford University, I was very much aware that I was being given an incredibly important and rare opportunity, and that too many people in society are not afforded the opportunity of a higher education. And so, what are you going to do with all of this? And I realized, coming from the small town that I was coming from, that I was one of the few people being afforded the opportunity of entering this place called Samford and meeting people whose ways of thinking were extremely different from mine, whose backgrounds were different from mine. And so I'm always concerned that universities not become incubators that nurture and cultivate sameness, but awaken people to the awareness that there are different views, different opinions, different faiths, and that you have to exist in the world beyond this place. And I think that is probably one of the most hopeful propositions that we could equip people with.
I think that's fantastic, right? I mean, we sometimes we think about teaching as how do I get you to adopt a particular methodology or worldview, but for you, the emphasis on encountering differences and learning how to exist in a pluralistic world is an important value that we take away from college. Eric, let me ask you about maybe the college students you encounter after they graduate. You've worked in significant industries, government, nonprofits, and now as the deputy director of the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. I'm guessing you have some impressive college graduates that arrive, right, at each of those places. Yeah. What are the things that you look for in a college graduate when you say, hey, here's a student that's not only graduated with an impressive CV or a resume or something like that? Yeah. What do you look for in a college student?
I think continuously I'm looking for people who are able to connect the dots. And I'm convinced anyone could get a degree. And getting a degree does not mean that you're an educated individual. And the educated individual has a responsibility not to oneself, but to society. And I think you are more interesting and more colorful when you're able to connect the dots. And you're able to connect the dots between math and music, or between interstellar space and poetry, or between English and you name it, right?
Artificial intelligence.
Artificial intelligence, right? And you're always engaging with people who are interesting because they've proven themselves capable of applying the ideas that they've studied in a larger sense by connecting dots and making some sequence between various ideas.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, that's very good. How have you seen the formation of students as agents of hope through each of your disciplines?
Can I just say
Yeah.
what Eric said?
Yes.
Copy paste.
Exactly.
I read your script before I spoke.
No, it's so funny. I loved your comments. I mean, in thinking about that, the first thing that I was thinking of was awareness, and you were all over awareness. And I think that's a critical aspect of this is that, we can be training people to kind of fill in the blanks in terms of completing a degree, and we walk away and they didn't really learn anything. And so a critical question for me is that awareness. How do I take what they've learned and help to apply it to facilitating change? And that's one of the things I absolutely loved about your book, Eric. I mean, the book in itself is a wonderful story. I mean, anybody could pick this up and delight in the story. But the way that you emphasized community, I think that is so incredibly critical, because so much of what we do is we professionalize anything that we want to do to help somebody in a caring sense, and we almost say, get out of the way, community, so the government can serve, or get out of the way, community, so that the professionals can serve. But I mean, your life story of this young man who emerged from this community that had just literally been through hell because of slavery and so forth like that, and they see the potential in a young man, they gather around him, and these are not PhDs, and these are people who are commonsensical, loving individuals, come around a person, see some potential, and be the community to that person. I mean, your book is brilliant in describing that. And so the thing that I always try to pound on with my students is, how do you connect people, particularly with severe disabilities, to that community, right? Yeah. The answer is not for us to give them more services. The answer is, how do we connect them to the community? That would be the real answer to their issues. And then kind of to put it back on them and say, what would I see if I looked at your personal life? Yeah. Right? I mean, you're here, you want to study about how to be a special ed teacher. Okay, that's great. Is that 9 to 5 and then you're done? Mm-hmm. What would I see if I looked at your personal life special ed teacher relative to how your community how you're contributing to the true outcome that we need is facilitating people having a community that's not filled with people who are paid to be with them, but people who choose to be with them. So that's kind of where I would go with it. But I love the way you pulled that out with the community in your book.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's another way of connecting the dots, as Eric said. Yeah, that's powerful. Thank you.
Yeah, so copy paste. I'm going to take the same strategy you took, and I'm going to copy paste. Ditto. I think one thing that the college education experience can do for students is to help them think deeply about their discipline in ways that go beyond, as you said earlier, just what gets me from point A to point B. For example, we see often in mathematics, and again, I'll use this example because it's the most close to me, but in mathematics, we often see that teachers will talk to students about why you should learn mathematics, because this is how GPS works, or this is how we send a rocket to space, or this is, and a lot of these students won't end up being rocket scientists. A lot of these students won't work in technology. So does that mean they should not learn mathematics? No, there has to be something deeper, and our teachers need to be communicating the depth of the mathematical experience. So a college education, both for the student that is learning this for the first time, but also for the student that's about to go into the education environment of students and helping them to see love for mathematics, they need to change the script a bit. And I'm stealing this or borrowing it from a mathematician. His name is Francis Su. He's a Christian mathematician, and he wrote a book called Mathematics for Human Flourishing. And this is a wild idea, get ready, but math is used for something deeper than just technologies or tricks that you may never use in the real world after you graduate, but to develop human flourishing. He puts it as the cultivation of virtues that would otherwise not arise as well had you not experienced mathematics. And he lists a various virtues. He says we get to cultivate beauty, permanence, truth, struggle, power, justice, freedom, community, and love through mathematics. And of course, I'm not going, again, this is not my material. This is Francis Sue's book, Mathematics for the Human Flourishing. But he realizes that that is not just something that you can give as an answer to a student and they will never see it again. These are virtues that they will see over and over again arise as they go into their communities, into their professional environments. That's deeper than just saying learn math because this is how that car moves, though you may never really work in that. Yeah. What can you take away with you from that gen ed course? It doesn't need to be math that you're not really focused on because you're trying to get to the career that you want to do, but maybe it's deep, it's building something deeper within you. It's arising these virtues that are growing within you and that otherwise we wouldn't develop fully. They wouldn't mature as virtues within our souls. So I think the college education provides students with something deeper than just a BS or a BA or et cetera, but rather it gives you something deeper, virtues that arise within the college experience, being exposed to these different disciplines. They all in some way cultivate these virtues and they embellish in beautiful ways these virtues. Otherwise, without that college experience, without going through these disciplines, these virtues can end up being underdeveloped in the human soul. So I think that's deeper than just get to the other side.
Yeah, and that brings us back to how Eric started us off, that this is a kind of soul formation, not just a formation of the mind, right?
Absolutely.
And maybe perhaps we need to think about math courses or general ed courses not just as prerequisites, but preconditions, right? Yeah. That form us, that form the soul and what we're looking for, patience, right? The kind of virtues that are cultivated in learning these subjects that prepare us for the good human flourishing later on, right? Yes. That's so much of our human flourishing may be based upon things that we've been formed and shaped by, but have forgotten. We're not conscious of necessarily. Yeah. Did you have something you wanted to say?
The architecture of the university is such that we've forgotten that it started as a college.
Yes.
And the professional schools have certainly helped us to become good professionals, to profess whatever it is we're going to profess. One of my great concerns is the balkanization and the siloing within colleges and universities today. Once upon a time, there was a core curriculum and everyone was reading Mark Twain or everyone was reading Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning or Aristotle's Rhetoric or Martin Luther King's letter from the Birmingham jail. And there was this universal conversation and understanding of an idea of struggle, of self-reliance. And you would take that conversation and be able to engage with other classmates, wherever they were, whatever they were pursuing in their own disciplines within the university. And that is the stuff of building community. Mm-hmm. And so the person who's sitting in the mathematics department has really something to talk to or talk about to the person who's sitting over in English Comp 101. And so at best, universities are good at cultivating community because no man is an island unto himself.
Right.
And no person works in inventing anything by him or herself. They're a part of a lab. They're a part of a team. And everyone brings something, their reason, their logic, their emotions, their temperament, their convictions, to the solving of these issues or these problems that we have in society.
Yeah. That's good. I think about in order for a community to be sustained, there needs to be a common vocabulary, right? A common language. And as an English professor, this is something I think about. I think about the power of language and the power of storytelling. And one of the ways that I want to think about my own discipline as a way to form agents of hope in the world is to get students to remember that, right? That how you tell the story matters, not just what's in the story, but how you tell it. It's not just describing something as factual. How you describe, is the bottle half empty or half full? And often I've thought about how in my younger days, I don't know how I adopted this, right? Probably trauma through my childhood or things like that. I had a very tragic view of life. And even through my college experience, I began to recognize, where did I inherit this way of storytelling, either my life or interpreting circumstances around me in very tragic ways? Immediately, I would say, everything, oh, there it goes, right? It's all downhill from here, right? It's all going south. But then I learned that the power of language and storytelling is that I can have a different framework, a different template for interpreting, right, the bottle as being half full. And that would often change even the outcome on how I would respond in those situations. And just even empowering students to begin to take charge of their own storytelling, right? That it's not just, right, fixed, that you have to tell it just this one way, right? There's another way to tell the story.
I was just going to add, I love this. I love both of this. One thing that I try to facilitate too is trying to say, let's understand what the narrative is about whatever the subject is. Let's understand the narrative. Okay, is this the way the narrative has to be, or can I facilitate an alternative narrative? And so, particularly from a Christian perspective, and thinking about disability, right? What is the Christian narrative about what disability is? I won't go into it, but I'll just say that it's wildly different than the secular narrative that is mostly accepted across all social groups and persuasions. And so, once again, it's that idea of changing that narrative.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, we've been talking about how our education in college can form us into agents of hope. And so my next question has to do with why. Why is that important? Why should we be formed? Or why should we think about how to form our students to become agents of hope in the world? And I'd like to ask each of you this question about how might hope as a virtue prepare us for success? Because we do want our students to go on after here and to be successful, to make an impact in the world in some way. How does hope enable our students to do that, right? Because going through hope, here in the process, being formed by hope, virtues are difficult to form, right? It takes discipline, it takes disappointment. You have to see the underside, right, of hope in order to find hope sometimes. We don't get to Easter Sunday, right, without, Eric, you mentioned earlier in an earlier conversation, without Good Friday. And so sometimes hope is difficult to form. What perspective do we give to students in the long run? How might hope as a virtue prepare us for future success after they leave here?
I think that we have to continuously underscore that education is the opposite of disillusionment. That education is the key to discovery and to opportunity. And that we're all responsible for helping to figure things out. We could either give up and let the ship go down, or we could try to figure out some way to keep things afloat. And we all have a role in trying to figure that out. Reinhold Niebuhr, who was a great social theological philosopher who wrote a lot of great books that capture the paradoxes and the ironies of our lives. He wrote Moral Man and Immoral Society, Children of Light, Children of Darkness. He wrote a wonderful book, The Ironies of American History. Mark Twain said that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. and the appreciation of that complex idea, to a large degree, is undergirded by a sense of humility, that none of us continuously get it right, and that woe is us when we discover 50 years from now that perhaps we were standing as social activists on the wrong side of history, right? Reinhold Niebuhr also says that nothing that is worth doing can be accomplished in a lifetime. Therefore, we're saved by hope. Nothing that is good or beautiful makes complete sense in its immediate context of history. Therefore, we're saved by faith. And nothing, no matter how virtuous, could be accomplished alone. Therefore, we're saved by love. We're saved by our ability to create community. We're saved by our understanding that we have a role to play in the world. in which we're stewarding. And that no one could be a bystander. We're all called to be active participants. And we see this being played out continuously, and it's very hard to comprehend people being in dialogue and trying to bring different points of view and trying to find. But I always go back to that wonderful scene of the Continental Congress and Thomas Jefferson, this young 20-something-year-old lad, being asked to write this statement, which we now have and call the Declaration of Independence. And as he wrote it, being kind of the natural scientist and empirical thinker, he wrote life, liberty, and property.
Oh.
And it was Benjamin Franklin who took his pen and he struck through property and he wrote the pursuit of happiness. It speaks to the continuum. It speaks to this continuous making of a democracy. The fulfillment is not just in what you have, property, what you own, but the continuation of that which you are pursuing, and that is happiness. However you define happiness societally.
How many of us are living with the unedited document, right? And we think about college as a means to life, liberty, and property.
But it comes with the awareness that you are an unedited document.
Yes, that's right. And that's wherein lies the hope.
Yeah. We're constantly revising the way we think, the way we see the world, understand the world. We're constantly revising our relationships with our parents, our siblings. And we're a work under progress. And to think that we have arrived at some moment where we have the answer and everyone else is wrong, and that we can't even accommodate, hearing someone else's point of view, is the destruction of civilization. And we've seen that manifested itself continuously in history. I come from Alabama. I've seen it through slavery. I've seen it through Reconstruction. I've seen it through the Jim Crow laws of the South, where someone held the key. And this was the decision, and there was no conversation, right? And it was only through conversation that people began to have their own ideas and feelings and convictions tempered with reality and with the sensibility of others.
That's very good. Other thoughts on this, how hope can prepare us for future success?
One thing I think a lot about is, one, how to facilitate hope. Okay. It's interesting that most of us are living in the midst of this collective for which things are going pretty well.
Yeah.
We're kind of doing okay. And yet there's this fringe around us for whom the world is not working.
Yeah.
And so the question is, one, how do I, with the awareness, going back to what Eric said earlier, how do I break out of my collective and embrace the fringe so that I can bring their needs in on me and change so that they feel hope on some level? That we one aspect of it. But I think another aspect of it, and it kind of grew out of, my thinking is also coming out of the things Eric said, kind of made me think about the civil rights movement, is the question of lament. I've thought a lot about lament. And lament is, I think lament is not embraced in the Christian church the way it should. I mean, if you lament, it almost implies that you have a lack of faith, right? Even though we have a book called Lamentations, right? And Lamentations comes to a close without any resolution, right? I think there's a degree to which one way that we can, and it sounds kind of contraindicated, one way we can facilitate hope is through facilitating lament and letting people feel that they have the freedom to lament when things aren't going, to say, how long? How long am I going to have to deal with this Jim Crow law? How long am I going to have to live with this disability? And the issue is oftentimes, particularly in the disability community, the response is forever. I mean, in terms of your earthly life, you are not going to get better. Okay, so how can I then facilitate hope in you? I can respond once again to your lament by, once again, brilliant book, coming alongside of you and facilitating community, right? So the thing is I may not be, able to change things, but at the very least, I can enter into your suffering with you. I was trying to remember my Bible verse. 1 Peter 2, 20 to 21 says, if you suffer for doing good, you were called to this. right? And so one of the things that this community aspect brings again is that when people are suffering, I may not be able to alleviate their suffering, but I can enter into their suffering and share in their lament, which I think is potentially a beautiful thing. So all that to say, once again, in my students, right, I want them to be aware of the power that they have to enter into the suffering of others, particularly those with disabilities, encourage their lament with them as a way of kind of, I don't know, helping them in the short term, right, until we're with the Lord someday. So that's kind of the way I think about it relative to my students, particularly in the context of God's sovereignty and disability.
I think that's beautiful. Thank you.
That's really good. For me, when I hear that question, how can hope as a virtue prepare us for success? The first thing that comes to mind is we need to broaden that word, success, in the minds of our students. We need them to understand that success has to be more holistic than they've been taught to measure it. And so sometimes they're being too practical. There's such a thing as being too practical and thinking of success as, I've gotten my degree that gets me to my job, that gets me to my paycheck, and thus I survive. If we want to see how can hope help us prepare for success, let's redefine success in a more holistic way. How do we measure success? I think well-being, mental health, that's part of success. Selflessness, that's part of success, because then my success impacts the community around me, and thus that impacts me as well. Dialogue versus echo chambers, that also is a measure of success. Success, again, with the people that are around me, once again. The legacy that I leave behind, the legacy that I'm leaving through my family, through my immediate community, and the people that I touch that eventually go on to other places. What's that legacy look like? I think when I think about success, to me, those are all in conjunction with the survival, get the certificate or the bachelor's degree or get the paycheck. That's more holistic. So then how does hope help that new holistic definition of success? Well, hope gives you resilience to therefore have well-being and have good mental health. It gives you that resilience that allows you to understand that, as Jeff was saying, look, this trial is unavoidable. This test is unavoidable. And it's all throughout the Christian theology. Jesus asked to be spared from his trial, from his test, his perismos. And so we also pray in the Lord's Prayer, lead us not into great trial, but if we do, deliver us from evil. So hope teaches us to have that resilience, to understand that. I love this quote by Pete Greig, who's a pastor in the UK. He says, God doesn't helicopter us out of the valley of the shadow of death. He parachutes in. And that's why we say, as I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for you are with me. So hope gives me the resilience to address my well-being. Hope allows us as a society to move, to not get stuck, because we're no longer selfless, as I said earlier. Hope convinces us that progress can be made as a society because we don't get stuck in echo chambers. We have dialogue. So again, to summarize this weird rant, success has to be defined more holistically. Then I can see how hope will help me be successful in that truer, grander way, I think.
You know, a common thread I'm hearing across each of your responses is the idea that hope sometimes is found precisely in the obstacle, in the trial, which is a kind of invitation. Right? And when we respond to that invitation, that's when hope arises, right? I think this is a marvelous way to think about what we're trying to do as educators. I want to thank you, for each of you, for your contributions to this conversation, and we look forward to seeing how this will impact our faculty, staff, and students. Want to remind our listeners to get Eric Motley's book, Madison Park, A Place of Hope, which will model for us how to tell stories of hope, how to take even some of our difficult pass, right? And remembering them and see those as opportunities, as an invitation to think about how we want to tell those stories in a way that's going to help us to get to a more holistic understanding of success. Yes. Thank you so much for this wonderful conversation to each of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Eric, for being here.
Thank you. My honor. Pleasure to be with you.